Hello everyone. I had a request for a video showing how to interpret table 12.8 because this looks considerably different than the output table that'll be provided by PSPP or SPSS that I've already given you the tutorial on how to interpret. So if you look in your textbook on page, where are we? Willow loads these weird. Well, I don't have a page number to follow on if you're looking at a hard copy, but we're on table 12.8 in chapter 12 in the section that's prediction and research articles, if you want to follow along. So what this is a table summarizing was a study where they were looking at predicting the effectiveness in treatment related to frequency of panic attacks, unpredictable panic attacks. So they looked at 4 different variables: BDI, which is your Beck Depression Inventory Score, age, number of treatment sessions, and the duration of the disorder. So these are the 4 variables that they were using to try to predict the effectiveness of treatment of these unpredictable panic attacks in people with agoraphobia. So the way we're going to interpret this table, I personally always like to start by looking at the overall R squared. The R squared in this study was 0.13. Now you'll remember from the other things we talked about in this chapter, the R square total of your regression model is telling you the amount of variance that you are predicting when you're considering these variables together. So if you, in your textbook also explains this down here in this following paragraph. So their conclusion is that only 13% of the overall variation in treatment outcome is predicted by these 4 variables. Meaning, if I'm looking at how effective is a treatment for unpredictable panic attacks and agoraphobia, and I'm considering these 4 things, I can only account for about 13% of the differences that I see in scores. Now, that's not nothing. It's still helpful, but it's also not saying, okay, this is a perfect prediction. If I know these 4 things, I can predict if you're going to be successful in therapy. I mean, that still leaves 87% of the variance unaccounted for. So it's meaningful, but it's not a super strong prediction. All right, so what else we need to know about this table? Your R, as you'll remember from chapter 11, always represents your correlation. So this is showing how each one of these variables by themselves correlates with the overall, what did I just do? Correlates with the overall success of the treatment outcomes. So considering the BDI has a 0.3 correlation, considering age has a negative 0.2 correlation, number of sessions a 0.12 correlation, and duration of disorder negative 0.13 correlation. You'll remember our general correlation that a positive number means they're moving in the same direction, a negative number means they're moving opposite. So for BDI, as BDI goes up, efficacy of treatment goes up. As age goes up, efficacy of treatment goes down. As number of sessions goes up, efficacy goes up. And as the duration of disorder goes up, efficacy goes down. So that's the correlation component of this. And you can see the significance value, statistical significance, starred in a pretty standard format. 1 star, 1 asterisk represents significance at the 0.05 level. 2 represents the 0.01 level. And 3 represents the 0.000 level. Now, the next step then is to look at our regression coefficients. Whenever we look at outputs, it will always tell us if we're looking at unstandardized or standardized. In this table, we see it noted that we are looking at standardized regression coefficients for this table. Now, remember the difference. With an unstandardized regression coefficient, we are saying for every 1 point that this thing increases, this other thing increases by 1 point. But that's not what we're doing with standardized coefficients. With standardized coefficients, we're saying for every 1 standard deviation that this increases, this is how much the other one changes. So for BDI, for every 1 standard deviation increase on a BDI, we're going to have a 0.3 standard deviation increase on our prediction of efficacy. For every 1 point increase in age, we're going to have a negative point, or for every 1 standard deviation increase in age, we're going to have a negative 0.2 decrease in standard deviations for treatment. For every 1 standard deviation increase in number of sessions, we're going to have less than 1/10 of a point standard deviation increase in efficacy. And for every 1 standard deviation change in duration of disorder, we're going to have a negative 0.02 standard deviation decrease in treatment efficacy. So you can understand why these two are not statistically significant. I mean, that's common sense. That is a very small change in the standard deviations. And then these two are statistically significant. Now, one thing of note with these two is the correlation is quite a bit stronger, even though it's still a pretty weak correlation, but the correlation is quite a bit stronger and is statistically significant, whereas the standardized regression is not. Up here, you see these two being fairly similar in the strength of their correlation and their standardized regression. What you can know from looking at this is that this means that when it's considered by itself, this has a notable but weak correlation. However, when put into a model with all 4 of these, a lot of the predictability power that these 2 variables carry has already been accounted for by the predictability of these variables, meaning their meaningfulness overlaps, their contributions to your overall outcomes overlap. And we talk in the earlier videos about how whenever they overlap, the significance will go down. So there's not as much unique contribution to an overall prediction by these variables, even though they do have a correlation when considered by themselves. Hopefully that helped clear that up. As always, please email me if you have any further questions.